Would you raise your hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you please state your full name?
I'm Jeffrey Edward Epstein, and my residence address is 6100 Red Hook Boulevard in Virgin Islands.
The Jeffrey Epstein story did not shock the world because crime was discovered. It shocked the world because power was exposed, briefly, and then allowed to fade back into silence. According to public records and widely reported investigations, Epstein was not a mystery figure operating in isolation. He was visible, connected, and repeatedly encountered by institutions meant to prevent exactly the kind of abuse he was later convicted of. This is not speculation, it is documented history. What remains unclear is not whether warning signs existed, but why they failed repeatedly across years, borders, and systems. From the outside, Epstein appeared to represent success. Wealth, private jets, global residences, and proximity to some of the most influential people in the world created an image of legitimacy. According to analysts, this image functioned as a shield. When wealth and influence intersect, assumptions change. Scrutiny softens. Questions are delayed. And over time, behavior that should raise alarms becomes normalized. This process does not require conspiracy. It requires comfort. Public reporting shows that Epstein moved freely between financial, political, academic, and social circles. Each environment treated him as someone already vetted by the others. This circular validation is a well-documented phenomenon in elite ecosystems. When access is mistaken for credibility, accountability dissolves quietly. No single institution feels fully responsible because responsibility is shared, and shared responsibility often means no responsibility at all. After Epstein's arrest, attention turned toward documents, court filings, testimonies, flight logs, financial records. These materials were described in the media as Epstein Files, though legally they were fragments of multiple cases spread across jurisdictions. According to legal experts, the public often misunderstands what such files represent. They are not confessions. They are not verdicts.
Okay, so Darren and I are sitting here. You can hear the echo. I'm pretending I'm talking to Darren. So, hi Darren. So Sarah and Nadia, are you guys having a good time? You can see I have a little sore on my face that I got from some black guy trying to kiss me. It's really disgusting.
With his tongue.
Oh, it's really, Anyway, I have pictures up on the wall. I had to borrow the Scotch tape to get the pictures on the wall. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
And
They are records, partial, procedural, and constrained by law. And yet, they matter, because they show patterns. One of the most misunderstood aspects of these records is the presence of famous names. Investigative journalists repeatedly clarified that appearing in documents does not imply guilt. Epstein actively cultivated proximity to power. Association created protection. This strategy is neither new nor unique. History shows that individuals seeking influence often surround themselves with respected figures, creating an environment where suspicion feels inappropriate. The power of association lies not in wrongdoing, but in perception. Media coverage following the document releases followed a predictable arc: initial outrage, heavy speculation, then fragmentation. According to media analysts, sustained investigative reporting requires institutional support, time, funding, legal protection. When stories threaten powerful interests, that support becomes fragile. This does not mean journalists stop working. It means their work becomes quieter, slower, and often incomplete from the public's perspective. Another element frequently discussed by experts is legal limitation. Epstein's death closed certain legal pathways permanently. Without a central defendant, cases lose momentum. Prosecutors must rely on secondary evidence, historical testimony, and cross-border cooperation. Each of these presents challenges. According to former prosecutors, justice systems are designed to handle individuals, not networks. When crimes intersect with wealth, politics, and time, outcomes rarely match public expectations. Public trust suffered as a result. Surveys cited in media research show a growing belief that elite accountability operates by different rules. This perception did not emerge solely from Epstein's case. It was reinforced by it. When consequences appear uneven, confidence erodes. And when confidence erodes, engagement follows. People stop expecting resolution. They stop demanding it. Yet, the most important takeaway from Epstein's story may not be what was revealed, but what was normalized. Abuse thrived not in darkness alone, but in environments where questioning felt impolite, inconvenient, or risky. According to sociologists, this is how systemic failure operates. It is not loud. It is passive. It is the absence of interruption. As years passed, the story transformed. Epstein became shorthand for a broader anxiety about power without oversight. The files became symbols rather than evidence. And the silence that followed became part of the narrative itself. Not because nothing remained to be uncovered, but because uncovering it required confronting systems that benefit from complexity, delay, and fatigue. This is where the story truly begins, not with Epstein as an individual, but with the structures that allowed him to exist in plain sight. Structures that, according to experts, did not disappear after exposure. They adapted. The environments Epstein moved through were not accidental. According to public reporting and expert analysis, elite spaces operate on an unspoken logic. Access is currency, and discretion is protection. These spaces are often private, invitation only, and shielded from public visibility. Conferences, retreats, fundraisers, private islands, luxury properties, and closed social circles are not inherently suspicious. In fact, they are common among global elites. What makes them powerful is not secrecy alone, but the absence of oversight. Sociologists who study elite behavior describe these environments as trust-based systems. Entry is granted not through background checks, but through reputation and referral. If one influential figure vouches for someone, that endorsement carries weight across multiple circles. According to analysts, this creates a chain reaction where legitimacy is assumed rather than verified. Once inside, behavior is rarely questioned, because questioning implies mistrust, and mistrust threatens the stability of the group. This culture of discretion is often framed as professionalism or privacy. But privacy, when combined with power, can quietly transform into insulation. Public reports suggest that Epstein understood this dynamic well. He positioned himself not as a decision-maker, but as a connector. Someone who introduced people, facilitated conversations, and opened doors. In elite culture, connectors are valuable. They are seen as useful, not threatening. Another factor frequently mentioned by researchers is social asymmetry. When individuals with extreme wealth or influence interact with those without it, power imbalances shape behavior. People may ignore discomfort, suppress doubts, or rationalize red flags because the cost of confrontation feels too high. According to psychologists, this dynamic does not require malicious intent. It is a natural response to hierarchy. Media investigations also highlighted how philanthropy functions within elite ecosystems. Donations to universities, foundations, and research initiatives create goodwill and credibility. According to non-profit experts, philanthropy can serve multiple purposes simultaneously, supporting causes, enhancing reputation, and expanding networks. None of these are illegal. However, they can complicate accountability. Institutions benefiting from donations may hesitate to scrutinize donors too closely, fearing financial or reputational loss. In Epstein's case, public records show repeated engagement with respected institutions even after concerns were raised. Analysts argue that this reflects a broader pattern. Institutions often prioritize stability over disruption. Addressing allegations requires resources, legal risk, and public scrutiny. Ignoring them is easier, until it is no longer possible. By then, damage is already done. The role of silence is central to understanding how such systems persist. Silence does not always mean ignorance. Sometimes it means uncertainty. Sometimes it means fear of consequences. Whistleblowers, according to labor and legal experts, face significant personal and professional risks. Without strong protections, many choose not to speak. And when silence is widespread, harmful behavior can continue unchecked. Public reaction to elite scandals often follows a predictable pattern. Initial shock leads to outrage. Outrage leads to demands for accountability. And when accountability stalls, attention fades. According to media researchers, this cycle benefits entrenched power structures. They do not need to suppress information indefinitely, only long enough for public interest to move on. Another aspect rarely discussed is normalization through repetition. When reports of misconduct become frequent, they lose impact. Audiences become desensitized. According to behavioral scientists, constant exposure to scandal can paradoxically reduce the perceived severity of individual cases. This creates an environment where even serious allegations struggle to provoke sustained response. Legal experts also point out that many elite interactions occur in gray zones: social, not professional; private, not public; informal, not documented. These zones are difficult to regulate because they exist outside traditional oversight mechanisms. And yet, decisions made in these spaces can influence real-world outcomes. This disconnect between influence and accountability lies at the heart of many institutional failures. Epstein's name faded from headlines. The structures that enabled him remained largely intact. According to analysts, this is not evidence of conspiracy, but of resilience. Systems built on access, discretion, and influence are designed to survive exposure. They adapt by becoming less visible, more cautious, and more fragmented. What emerges from this analysis is a shift in focus. The question is no longer who attended which meeting or appeared in which document. The deeper question is why such environments exist without meaningful oversight in the first place. Why access is granted without transparency. Why silence is rewarded more than accountability. These questions extend far beyond one individual. They challenge assumptions about power, trust, and responsibility at the highest levels of society. And they suggest that without structural change, exposure alone is not enough. The Epstein case, according to many experts, should have been a turning point. Instead, it became a warning, one that may have been acknowledged, but not fully acted upon. As the Epstein story moved further from the headlines, another pattern became visible: how narratives are managed, softened, or slowly dissolved over time. According to media analysts, this process is rarely coordinated in a dramatic way. It happens through incentives, risk calculations, and structural limits. News organizations operate within legal frameworks, advertiser relationships, and audience metrics. When a story becomes legally complex, emotionally draining, or commercially risky, its coverage naturally declines. One of the most powerful tools in narrative control is reframing. Instead of focusing on systems, coverage shifts toward individual controversy, speculation, or personality-driven debate. This reframing, according to communication experts, fragments attention. Viewers argue about interpretations rather than examine structures. The story becomes noise instead of inquiry. Over time, this noise exhausts public interest. Another factor frequently cited by journalists is access journalism. Reporters rely on sources, officials, institutions, insiders, who grant interviews and information. Challenging these sources too aggressively can result in lost access. According to veteran reporters, this creates a tension between truth-seeking and sustainability. It does not require censorship. It requires compromise. And compromise, repeated over time, reshapes coverage. Legal risk also plays a central role. Defamation laws place the burden of proof on publishers. Even accurate reporting can lead to costly litigation. Media organizations, especially those without massive legal budgets, must choose their battles carefully. As a result, stories involving powerful individuals are often presented with extreme caution. Language becomes conditional. Claims are attributed. Conclusions are avoided. For audiences, this caution can appear like avoidance. The digital media environment amplifies these dynamics. Algorithms reward engagement, not depth. According to platform researchers, emotionally charged content spreads faster than complex analysis. This creates pressure to simplify narratives. In the Epstein case, this meant focusing on shocking details rather than systemic examination. While such coverage attracts attention, it rarely sustains understanding. Another element is institutional fatigue. Large investigations require time, coordination, and persistence. News cycles move quickly. Editors rotate. Priorities change. According to newsroom insiders, long-term investigative projects are often the first to be deprioritized during budget cuts or strategic shifts. When this happens, stories do not end, they simply stop evolving. Public perception responds accordingly. When updates slow, audiences assume resolution. Silence is interpreted as closure. According to psychologists, humans are uncomfortable with unresolved narratives. In the absence of new information, the mind fills gaps with assumptions. This creates a false sense of completion, even when questions remain unanswered. Social media complicates this further. While it allows alternative voices to emerge, it also accelerates misinformation. Speculative content often spreads alongside responsible analysis. This mixture undermines credibility. According to media literacy experts, when audiences struggle to distinguish verified reporting from conjecture, trust declines across the board. As trust declines, engagement declines with it. Political considerations also influence narrative lifespan. Stories that implicate multiple parties across ideological lines are difficult to sustain. They do not fit neatly into partisan frameworks. Without a clear political angle, momentum fades. According to political analysts, bipartisan discomfort often results in collective silence rather than confrontation. Another overlooked aspect is reputational inertia. Institutions rarely admit failure openly. Doing so invites scrutiny, liability, and reform. According to organizational psychologists, denial and minimization are common defensive responses. Over time, these responses become normalized. Failures are reframed as oversights. Oversights are framed as lessons learned. And lessons learned rarely result in accountability. The Epstein case intersected with all of these forces. Legal complexity limited disclosure. Media economics limited depth. Political ambiguity limited outrage. Digital incentives limited nuance. Together, these factors did not erase the story, they diluted it. What remained was a cultural reference rather than an ongoing investigation. Yet dilution does not equal resolution. According to experts in institutional reform, unresolved failures accumulate. They resurface in new forms, new cases, new scandals. Patterns repeat because underlying incentives remain unchanged. Exposure without reform becomes precedent rather than prevention. This raises a critical point often missed in public discourse. Accountability is not an event. It is a process. And processes require sustained pressure. When pressure dissipates, systems revert to equilibrium. In elite ecosystems, that equilibrium favors discretion, continuity, and control. By this stage, the Epstein narrative had transformed again. It was no longer a breaking news story. It was a symbol of power without oversight, of institutions without consequence, of truth constrained by structure. And symbols, while powerful, do not enforce change on their own. What determines whether a story reshapes systems or simply passes through them is not evidence alone, but persistence. According to reform advocates, the absence of persistence is what power counts on most. As the Epstein story settled into the background of public memory, a quieter question remained unresolved. What happens after exposure fails to produce change? According to experts who study institutional accountability, this moment, after outrage, after headlines, after promises, is the most revealing phase. It shows not how systems react to shock, but how they behave once attention fades. And in many cases, behavior returns to baseline. Power structures, analysts argue, are not dismantled by awareness alone. They respond to incentives. When consequences are minimal and time erases urgency, there is little motivation to reform. The Epstein case, despite its scale, followed this pattern. Investigations were announced. Reviews were conducted. Statements were issued. But structural transformation remained limited. Not because solutions were impossible, but because disruption carries cost, and cost is something entrenched systems are designed to avoid. Another dimension often overlooked is the psychological impact on the public. Repeated exposure to unresolved injustice can create disengagement. According to behavioral researchers, people protect themselves emotionally by lowering expectations. When accountability feels unreachable, apathy becomes a coping mechanism. This does not mean people stop caring. It means they stop believing that care will lead to change. This shift benefits systems that thrive on inertia. Silence does not need to be enforced when resignation does the work. According to governance experts, the most stable power structures are not those that suppress opposition aggressively, but those that outlast it patiently. Time becomes a shield. Complexity becomes camouflage. The Epstein case also revealed how responsibility diffuses across institutions. Law enforcement, media, political bodies, financial systems, and social networks each played a role. Yet no single entity carried full accountability. According to organizational theorists, this diffusion is a common feature of large-scale failure. When responsibility is shared, consequences are diluted. Everyone acknowledges the problem. No one owns the outcome. This raises a broader issue about how modern societies handle elite misconduct. Systems are often built to manage individual violations, not interconnected failures. When influence spans borders, industries, and decades, traditional mechanisms struggle. Legal frameworks lag behind reality. Oversight becomes reactive rather than preventive. Some reform advocates argue that the real lesson of Epstein's case lies not in identifying new villains, but in re-examining assumptions. Assumptions about trust, about reputation, about who is questioned and who is believed. According to these advocates, prevention begins not with exposure, but with skepticism applied evenly, regardless of wealth or status. Transparency is frequently cited as the solution, but transparency without enforcement has limits. Documents can be released. Reports can be published. But without consequences, transparency becomes performative. According to anti-corruption specialists, accountability requires follow-through, clear standards, independent oversight, and the willingness to impose penalties even when doing so is uncomfortable. Another recurring theme in expert discussions is cultural change. Institutions reflect the values they reward. If discretion is valued over disclosure, silence over challenge, access over integrity, outcomes will follow. Changing this culture is slow and often resisted. But without cultural change, procedural reforms remain superficial. The Epstein narrative, when viewed in full, is not just about crime or scandal. It is about warning signals ignored, power normalized, and failure absorbed without correction. It shows how systems can acknowledge harm without altering behavior. And that may be its most unsettling aspect. Yet unresolved stories are not meaningless. According to historians, they shape future expectations. They influence how the public interprets new cases, how journalists approach investigations, and how institutions anticipate scrutiny. The legacy of Epstein's case may not be immediate reform, but heightened awareness, an understanding that proximity to power is not proof of integrity. Whether that awareness leads to lasting change depends on what follows. On whether questions continue to be asked after attention moves on. On whether institutions prioritize prevention over reputation. On whether accountability is treated as a process, not a moment. In the end, the Epstein Files were never just about what was written inside them. They were about what surrounded them, the delays, the silences, the fragments, and the unanswered questions. They revealed not only the actions of one individual, but the boundaries of systems meant to protect the vulnerable. And perhaps that is where this story truly ends, not with certainty, but with responsibility. Responsibility to question power without fear. To value transparency without spectacle. And to remember that exposure is only the beginning. What matters is what comes after.